Hi, everyone. Very good afternoon, and welcome to another Health AI Roundtable discussion focused today on the critical area of ethics, ethical challenges in the AI and quantum computing, as well as truth, trust, and technology concept. So we thrilled to have Dale Good with us to share his insights with the session moderated by Gopal Khanna. And let me introduce Gopal. Gopal is co-founder and chairman of the Health AI Institute. He has held senior executive positions in the industry, launch and advise startups venture, and he's a distinguished public servant. Mr. Khanna was a member of Minnesota Governor Tim Paul Lenty's cabinet and has held senior executive and foreign service policy positions in federal government, where he served in the administration of the President George W. Bush and President Donald J. Trump. Most recently, Mr. Khanna was the fifth director of Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality at HSS in the Washington, D.C. He, as a CXO advisor and board member, Gopal works in public and private sector centers at the intersection of healthcare, technology, and government. Hand over to Gopal.
Thank you, Ikram. We are indeed pleased to be here today with Mr. Dale Good. But before we introduce him, let me just give you a little bit of flavor about Health AI Institute and its focus. Um, what we are seeing is an amazing convergence of technology, policy, and practice as we enter the new era of artificial intelligence. Actually, what we are seeing is the dawn of the fifth industrial revolution. And what we're finding out is there's a growing frustration amongst patients, providers, and policymakers that we are moving further and further away from our ultimate goal of patient centeredness and from providing care that is efficient, effective, and of high value for the people we serve. Amongst others, siloed construct of the healthcare industrial complex has contributed hugely to the dysfunction and the currently highly fragmented approach to delivering care. You see, what we're finding is that the grand challenge before us is how to take advantage of AI and leverage new technologies to break the perennial silos in the healthcare sector and drive innovation, both vertically and horizontally, to achieve the more integrated, coordinated whole person care utopian vision we've always talked about. What is needed really is a 360-degree view of the healthcare ecosystem to ensure that we do not miss the opportunity AI provides us to innovate and define the new frontier of care by design rather than stumble into the unknown. With innovation in mind, AI Institute has been organizing roundtable discussions with leading experts with whom we can have nuanced conversations on AI and its impact on different aspects of health and life sciences sector and explore with them transformational opportunities for the future. In essence, we want to learn from experts about application of AI in different settings. We want to hear what they see through their lens in their area of focus as opportunities for AI driven innovation. And we also want to understand how to mitigate risks associated with AI and build an integrated healthcare ecosystem for the future of the country. We are really honored and pleased to have with us Mr. Dale Good, principal at Justice Technology Consulting, Inc. Dale is a dear friend of mine. I've known him for many, many years, and he's had a distinguished career, which includes starting with enlisting in the Navy after college and serving on an electronic intelligence ship, touring countries on both coasts of Africa. He was cleared top secret compartmentalized, the highest classification, and was amazed at what he saw during his time serving in the Navy, particularly how he could communicate via satellite with NSA headquarters in Washington, D.C., and that was, of course, several decades ago. And that is what got him interested in technology and on a path to a career in information technology. Dale was then commissioned as an officer and toured throughout the Caribbean. After military service, Dale attended graduate school in a PhD program in judicial process with emphasis on research, design, and statistics. Following graduate school, Dale became the research director and then the CIO for Minnesota Court System and taught evenings as adjunct faculty at Metropolitan State University. Dale then served as the CIO for the technology program at the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. And most recently, Dale Good served as an executive for the California court system, managing the Cross-Agency Justice Information Sharing Program. He has served on national justice technology standards committees and presented at many national conferences. We are indeed honored and pleased to have with us Dale Good, our distinguished guest today, speaker for the day, who will be sharing his thoughts on often neglected topic of ethical challenges of artificial intelligence and quantum computing, and as he calls it, the 3 T's: truth, trust, and technology. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation. It will be led by my colleague Ikram Khan, Senior Fellow at the Institute. Please feel free to submit your questions during the course of the presentation. Ikram will be collecting them and will lead the Q&A after the discussion. Dale, thank you for joining us, sir. The virtual floor is all yours.
All right. Thank you, Gopal. Thank you for the kind comments. So this is a topic that I've been interested in for quite a while, and I have presented it at two different times at the California State University, Sacramento, at the Renaissance Society. That's a program at Sac State for senior learners. So it's a lot of us retired folks, retired in all sorts of different careers, that want to share things that we're interested in. So I'll go ahead and get started. I included this. I thought this is an interesting way to start. This is what Carl Sagan, the research scientist, the physical scientist, in 1995 said about his concern about an American, which is children and grandchildren, when the United States is a service and information economy, when nearly all the manufacturing industries have slipped away to other countries, awesome technological powers in the hands of very few, no one representing the public interest can even grasp the issues. When the people have lost the ability to set their own agendas or knowledge, we question those in authority. When clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscopes, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true, we slide almost without noticing back into superstition and darkness. And this is the same, quote, "The dumbing down of America is most evident in the slow decay of substantive content, in the enormously influential media, the 30-second sound bites, etc., lowest common denominator programming, credulous presentations on pseudoscience and superstition, but especially a kind of celebration of ignorance." And this was 30 years, 40 years ago. And, so very, very prescient. This is before the internet. This is before social media, and obviously way, way before artificial intelligence and quantum computing. So what I'd like to do is kind of a little bit of a dive into the concept of truth, the concept of trust, talk a little bit about technology, where we're at, and then jump into the ethical concerns of AI and quantum computing. Excuse me. So how do we understand it from a sociological, historical perspective? Are we suffering truth decay? And then what about trust? It's incredibly important. Can philosophical anthropology help explain our trust issues? What is the historical and sociological relationship between truth and trust? Are they fundamentally entwined? Does lack of truth erode trust? And then what direction are we heading and why? And that's even, again, before AI and quantum computing. So just a little visual here. What is this ancient thing? Well, this is a sextant. When I was in the Navy, we used the sextant to navigate. And actually, the sextant was in use until the 1990s. And in fact, you're looking at stars and you're using a mathematical table to determine your geopolitical, presence. Geospatial, it's your equivalent to the global positioning system of today, but in an ancient artifact. but they're still on board ships in case they use GPS. So they're still used today. And then, in this relatively short period of time in our history, we've gone maybe the kind of phones we're talking about here, our parents and our grandparents used, and then what we're using today, this radical increase in the speed of technological development. 30 years, less than 30 years, the internet, GPS, smartphones, social media, and now artificial intelligence and quantum computing coming soon. They're saying, again, this is an article in the New York Times, IBM saying it takes 3 minutes and 20 seconds to do on a quantum computer what it would take 10,000 years on a state-of-the-art computer today. So again, it's incredible rapid change in technology. So what is the impact on truth and trust? Is humanity capable of managing this radical acceleration in technological change? And then what can we expect in the future? What does the history of social media tell us? And then what about American capitalism? And when I talk about that, I'm really talking about the neoliberal school of economics, which is the Milton Friedman, University of Chicago, Friedrich Hayek. The only responsibility of companies is profit for shareholders. And then even when we get past that, what about bad actors, foreign and domestic? This is a book that was just published. I find it very interesting. Stephen Brill, The Death of Truth, How Social Media and the Internet Gave Snake Oil Salesmen and Demagogues the Weapons They Needed to Destroy Truth and Polarize the World, and What We Can Do. And again, I can make this available, Gopal, if we want. I can send a PDF version because I've got all the references identified also. Another thing this is a documentary on Netflix. So this was where they interviewed many Silicon Valley techs and executives about their work in technology today and some of the ethical concerns of their ethical concerns, the people that created some of this technology, their concerns about how much control it has over the way we think and act and live. And again, I've got the hyperlink down below for that also. Also, and this was mentioned in the Brill book, The Death of Truth. He says that this book was the Bible for social media engineers at Stanford, and it was called the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab. And so he argues that virtually all of the technicians, or the vast majority of the technicians working to develop social media in Silicon Valley use this, we're educated in this persuasive technology lab and use this book as a guide. And we're going to dive into that a little bit about what it was, how it laid out persuasive technology. We'll get into that in a little bit. This is the International Association of Universities. And it says that while technology itself does not have an agenda, the leading companies behind the tools do. In other words, while the impact of these tools is global, their developments are currently curated by private companies in only a few countries. And several authors are pointing towards issues of fair, inclusive representation, issues around veracity and hallucinations and biases that are inevitable. They want to address exacerbating already existing inequalities. There are no absolute answers to the many questions that arise when technological advances force us to think about what it means to be human in societies that are increasingly dependent on digital technology. However, the quest for higher education is to serve our human intelligence to examine, study, explore, and shape the future of generative AI in a manner that serves humanity and augment human intelligence. And again, I'm not saying there isn't benefit from AI and quantum computing. What I'm saying, there could be tremendous benefit. What I'm saying is we also have to be concerned about the ethical concerns associated with it. And we can learn from some of the things that have happened more recently about what those ethical concerns should be. Okay, just a real quick on truth. The point I want to make here, so this is a book that was published in 1966 But as recently as 1998, it was identified by the International Sociological Association as a book of the century. And so this was one of the books in my education that was just had such an impact on my thinking. So they introduced the term social construction of reality. And the central concept is that people and groups interacting in a social system create over time concepts of mental representations of each other's actions. And these concepts eventually become habituated into reciprocal roles played by the actors in relation to each other. When they're made available to others, members of society, the reciprocal interactions are said to be institutionalized. That embeds meaning in society. Knowledge and people's conceptions and beliefs of what reality is becomes embedded in the institutional fabric of society. Reality is therefore said to be socially constructed. So again, so this is looking at truth from a sociological perspective. But even the science of knowledge, scientific knowledge, has an historical and sociological dimension. And what I love to reference here is Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. Again, this is a book from the 60s, but it was so prescient, ahead of our times, and talking about how even within science, which we always think of hard science, that there are these theoretical revolutions that occur, whether it's the Copernican revolution, Lavoisier discovery of oxygen, Einstein's throwing of Newtonian physics. We go from the linear to relativity theory and that's within the less than 100 years, where there's been that radical change in how we viewed physics. And then, of course, artificial intelligence now and quantum computing, in particular quantum computing, appears to be taking that same revolutionary approach to how we view science today. And I just want to make a point here. One of the differences between truth in the social world and truth in the scientific world is that science has an advantage over what we may consider true in society in general, and that is because of the process of scientific inquiry that we don't have when we just talk about social truth. Scientific inquiry relies on evidence, especially evidence that can be measured and replicated, and it utilizes processes, and I think that's really important, processes such as true experimental design. And I reference a book here, Campbell and Stanley, Experimental and Quasi-Experimental Design for Research. Those processes that they discuss that improves the certainty of the scientific prediction is so important. And academic scientific inquiry is peer-reviewed. Or in the example of medical and pharmaceutical research, it is peer-reviewed by independent experts in an institution created by the government for that peer review purpose. That book by Jill Lepore argues that the jury process is a model of a process that's important, an important tool to achieve truth in the social sector. So again, this notion of process, I think, is very important for understanding truth. And then another critical factor, and this is kind of my own thinking, another critical factor is full transparency in data sources, research methodology, and in today's critical examples, the critical need for transparency in computer algorithms and social media. So within the scientific inquiry, we have processes that are well accepted and we use frequently, but we don't use them. We don't have full transparency in the social sphere, and that lack of transparency, that we don't understand how those algorithms work. We can see sometimes the outcomes, but we really need to be able to drive down into those and understand exactly what they're doing, what the value system is, and what their motivations are. This is just a point, and I'm preaching to the choir here about what quantum mechanics is. Here's IBM saying quantum computing advances a whole new era. And we've kind of already talked about that. talking a little bit about Truth Decay. So the Rand Corporation is a think tank. They used to do a lot of research for, our national security and military, but now they're kind of an independent think tank. And they described it. So this is a reference, but there's a whole lot of information they provided on Truth Decay. And they call it the diminishing role of facts and analysis in American public life. This phenomenon has taken hold over the last 2 decades, eroding civil discourse, causing political paralysis, and leading to general uncertainty about what's true and what isn't. While there were previous eras in American history, Vietnam War, for example, that resemble what's going on today, one thing makes our current Truth Decay moment different: growing disagreement about objective facts. This is where I referenced before. Jill Lepore is a professor of American history at Harvard. She studies historical methods of gaining knowledge. So that's why I find it real interesting. She's written a book, Who Killed Truth? And If Then, kind of the scientific if then model. She also I have a reference here. She has a podcast that's fascinating. So about who killed truth, and kind of gets at this. But there's one summary from this that I want to include. And this is an excerpt from her podcast. She says, watching it all, I felt as if my brain was on rewind. Specifically, my head kept rewinding back to a book published in 1994 called A Social History of Truth by Stephen Shapin, Emeritus Professor of History of Science at Harvard. I asked him to read my favorite lines. Knowledge is a collective good. In securing our knowledge, we rely upon others, and we cannot dispense with that reliance. That means that the relations in which we have and hold our knowledge have a moral character, and the word I use to indicate that moral relation is trust. He argues that you can't actually know anything alone. You can only know things with other people. And that's truth, whether it's in the social sphere or the sphere of science. It really is scientists working together, looking at what's already been discovered, taking that information and further developing it. So trust, kind of already talked about. These are some references that we don't have to talk about it, but you could listen to this as a Crisis in Democracy developed by the University of Southampton. And then what I say, what is the sociological and historical relationship between truth and trust? Are they fundamentally entwined? What is true? How do we know it's true? Who do we trust to provide the truth? This is a really interesting, this is Professor Emeritus of Oslo Media and Communication Studies. This was presented at Cal State Sonoma, a session that I attended. He talks about how trust is essential to humanity. It's grounded in the human condition and in our very embodiment. We are utterly vulnerable and absolutely dependent on one another for survival, for thriving and flourishing. Human trust is greatly complicated by our advanced society with more human interactions and use of communications technology. So he's already issuing that warning today that the use of these new technologies of communications are already undermining trust. This is another reference. This is the University of Chicago Graham School. If you're interested, you can follow up on that. Also, in this era of loss of truth and trust, and this is Minnesota, and this is just in Minnesota, but it's happening all around the country, is we're losing community newspapers. We're losing traditional methods of providing and gaining access to truth. So this is some examples of where hedge fund owners have bought up local newspapers all around the state and discarded them with no thought to the information void they leave in these vibrant communities. This is the Minneapolis Star Tribune this April, talking about TikTok, Facebook, and other social media, and as their news sources decline, people use these, technologies instead of traditional news. People aren't getting the news about all of their local activities. They're getting the news daycare shortages, affordable housing, etc. The 8 newspapers being eliminated are institutions, 160 years old, 140 years old. All right, let's get into technology. So I find this book, and I hope I'm doing okay. I'm less than, I got another 10 minutes maybe. Go, Paul.
Dave.
Another 10
Yeah.
minutes? Okay.
10 to 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the book by Stephen Brill. In the book by Stephen Brill, he references this as the Bible for social media engineers at Stanford. And I found it really interesting. So he talks about the computer advantages compared to human persuaders. And he says, computers are persistent, they allow anonymity, they can store, access, and manipulate huge volumes of data. And of course, this was being said in 2003. This isn't being said when we're looking at AI and quantum computing. Computers, you can use many modalities, again, before AI, and he's already saying, this is one of the advantages of technology persuasion. Computer software can scale, computers can be ubiquitous. But then he goes in later.
Dale, are you there? Seems that he is frozen.
Are we able to reach Dale Good?
I apologize for that. I think I have unstable internet right now for some reason. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. No issue, Dale.
Okay.
You can resume from where you was.
I apologize. Very frustrating.
No worries.
Okay, I gotta find my shared. Oh boy. So for whatever reason, it's not finding my PowerPoint.
We'll just talk more about it, Dale, based upon our earlier conversations on the various things that you see.
Okay, I'll just talk.
Yeah.
Um,
We'll share your presentation with the folks on the call separately, but you can talk about some of your observations, and then
Okay.
maybe we can start the Q&A piece now. I have a lot of questions already, if you're okay, Dale.
Let me just do 5 minutes more, a couple more minutes more.
Yeah.
Is that all right?
Please, yeah, please.
Okay. So again, this was this book from 2003 on the ethics of persuasive technology. Oh, hang on, I'll go back one. Unique ethical concerns. It can exploit the positive reputation of computers. It can mask persuasive intent. It can be proactively persistent. It can control the interactive possibilities. Computers can affect emotions that can't be affected by them. Computers cannot shoulder responsibility. And then the BJ Hogg book, he says he develops a way to look at the ethics of persuasive technology, and I think that's incredibly important. So the intention: why was the product created? The methods of persuasion, using emotions to persuade, methods that are unethical, methods that raise red flags, operant conditioning or surveillance as examples, outcomes that include intended and unintended consequences, and then the responsibility for unintended outcomes. So then the only thing, and if you want to distribute this, I have excerpts from a number of different institutions that are looking at ethical AI and quantum computing. So one is the Center for AI Safety, and that's a nonprofit. I have several articles. AI poses risk of extinction, and this was a number of industry leaders publishing an article in the New York Times a year ago. There's an institute at Stanford called SAFE, Stanford Center for AI Safety, and I have some quotes from that.
Well, I think so, Dale, it'll be good to have all of these posted, and we will make that available to our audiences over here so they can read up.
Okay.
Maybe we can start sort of a conversation, and I have a bunch of questions before we go to Ikram, because he's been collecting a bunch of questions as well. So, Dale, a total shift from where we are, what you've been talking about. My question to you is, looking at your criminal justice background, do you foresee, based upon all the ethical concerns that you've talked about, in the real world situation, could the CEOs of companies, could the board members be held liable at some point in time? If you recall, Dale, 25 years ago when Y2K was happening, there was an enormous amount of concern amongst the judicial community that there will be liability situations. Now with AI, given the complexity of the truth, trust, and technology, right? What kind of issues do you see? Could there be, criminal liabilities happening?
So my quick answer is no. And the reason for that is Section 230, Federal Code Section 230. The Stephen Brill book has chapter, I believe it's chapter 2, talks all about the history of Section 230. And the most recent amendments to Section 230 were in like 1996. So this is just as the internet was getting started. And there was still that attempt to protect the internet as if they were only, it was like the mail delivery service. They didn't have anything to do with the content. They were providing a platform, a technical platform for sharing information. And yet what we've seen today, we've seen with social media, is we've seen the companies, of course we see this with bad actors too, but they use the technology to make a profit by distributing disinformation.
Yes.
So we have a disconnect between Section 230 as it was conceived and as it was modified in 1996 and what we have today. And so those entities are still protected. And that book, you can read that chapter in Stephen Brill's book for all the details.
So you're saying that if I was CEO of a company, right, and my doesn't matter what kind of delivery system, but if you're using artificial intelligence and doing our best job in terms of making sure that it is used properly with standards and rules, and so that the best possible outcomes are achieved for the patient. Are you saying that making the best effort is good enough? That what would the leadership be thinking about when it comes to any liability issues? If there's such profound ethical considerations, there has got to be some concerns as to how to secure and make sure that there's no violation. I'm not sure if I'm making
that's the critical question. I think what I've witnessed in the last couple of years are these different think tanks, and particularly at Stanford Law School, that Stanford HII Institute. There's a number of the Brennan Center. There's a number of these that are trying to get ahead of this and trying to get out front and say, here are the ethical concerns, and here's some ways. So like using that the Persuasive Technology book, when he talks about the ethical concerns, to try to use those to formulate policy. But again, the policy still has to go in front of our political entities, which are, have been pretty much dysfunctional, and they seem to have a terrible time understanding, today's technology, let alone future technology. So I don't want to be totally pessimistic, but I am very, very concerned that, other than the fact that we have some entities out there trying to intellectually get in front of the concerns and then try to get that into the mass media, those concerns. Other than that, I don't see much happening on the legal front.
Ikram, do you want to take it from here? You have been collecting questions. What are we hearing?
I do have, I'll just make one other point. I do have a trial judge in Minnesota that I remain, he's a good friend that I remain close with. And I've been sharing a lot of this with him, and he's very interested in what you all are doing. And he might be available, if we wanted him, he might be available to kind of comment on some of the, I'm not an attorney.
Yeah. That'd be great because,
but he might be available to provide some of that perspective also.
Yeah, maybe my question was moving more towards the legal component. So that would be great to talk to.
I think I think he doesn't disagree with my concerns, but he could provide much more of a legal, understanding of that. Yeah.
And probably those legal considerations would become that much more important as the Congress and even state legislatures are thinking about their posture and position in terms of how to govern the space, or how to have standards created as AI development happens.
Right. So, we saw some of this when Congress brought in the leadership in Silicon Valley, social media leadership, and interrogated them. And you got a full room of lawyers supporting social media, and there wasn't a lot of revelation of information. It was that kind of pushback from the executives. I didn't see a lot of progress there, but
Ikram,
that was within the last year, I think it was.
Ikram, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Dale, for insightful presentation, and thanks, Gopal, for moderating it. I've been a lot of responses I'm getting for the participants, and we have so many questions now for the participants. I like to, it's a very interesting area, Mr. This is ethical as consideration in the AI, and the quantum computing is very, very pressing issue, and that's what the top of the talk is. So I will be trying to do justice here with some of those questions, and trying to see that as comes from mix of all that, what is here, and as many as possible. So Dale, in your view, what are the most pressing ethical challenges that AI and quantum computing pose to the truth and the trust in society today?
Well, I think what we're seeing, and that was what I was trying to articulate in the early part of the presentation, is we were already seeing trust in institutions, in truth. We were already starting to see that erode. And I think what we've seen from the impact of social media and the clickbait, where they do everything they can in their algorithms to keep people engaged because they can sell that to advertisers for a profit. So our incentivization in technology, has an outcome that is harmful to truth. And then when people don't, they disbelieve what's true and find everything is untrue, then there's no trust in social, and society is dependent on trust. It's dependent on truth and trust. So this, this could be a radically difficult challenge for our social order. It's already kind of out there percolating with social media and the internet, and I think with artificial intelligence and especially the power of quantum computing, it could be even more of a red light.
So we understand now social media, the way it works, but in which way you see that the AI could be used as a tool to further create mistrust in the society and can impact the truth in that way to society? What's your thought on that part?
Well, I think we're seeing a little bit of that right now, and this is really, the most superficial level of AI, but the taking digital images and modifying them and say this is a politician that's saying something that they didn't. We're seeing it in Russian disinformation, North Korean disinformation, trying to affect again, trust in our institutions, just trying to sow discontent. So I think I think it just, these tools provide more power. They provide power for good, but they provide power for evil too. And, again, what I got into was more the development, the corporate development of it. I wasn't getting into the bad foreign actors or foreign or domestic actors, but
yeah, that's good to hear. As our institute is focused on health and so many participants also come from that background. So one of the participants looking to hear from you and your thought on that. How do you think that rapid integration of AI might impact public trust in institutions such as healthcare? And what's your thought on that?
Well, again, if I use the example of, social media, we see, the distrust of vaccination, anti-vax. We see all of the friction around COVID and the COVID response, what was necessary and what wasn't necessary. So again, it's just trying to use the use of current technology as the blinking red light for AI and quantum computing. And and without something like Section 230, without the safeguards, I think it can become even more concerning. Disinformation, or using information for the purposes of profiting without consideration for the outcomes, without consideration for the social outcomes.
Great. So you mentioned in early part of the presentation, much more learning from social media. So what with evolution of social media, and now we see this AI is taking over and it's getting applied to many different domains, including healthcare. So what, which way you think that could prevent similar ethical pitfalls in the healthcare domain?
Again, I think the number one thing is transparency.
Mm-hmm.
But you have a problem with transparency in our economic institutions because they have the right to privacy. It's part of their business model is to keep it private. So I think you have that friction in the corporate world between, what they perceive as their own private information for how they do their business, even though from a public perspective, it may have bad consequences. That's a friction. Again, that's where that Section 230, comes in, and they failed us on that. I'm sorry, I'm kind of negative. I apologize.
No, Dale, it's important for us to really understand the concerns, because if we don't address them upstream, then there'll be more challenges downstream.
Right.
So when you point out when you talk about the section 230, right? Do you see that the Congress needs to go back and rethink and updates are needed? What do you see?
Yes.
Where should it go?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, again, I don't want to get into, small p politics here, but I do think that's where having an entity that some kind of regulatory entity and having legislation, a law that would provide for some more transparency. It may not be fully public transparency, but it would at least be transparency in the same way that you see it in pharmaceuticals. They're still protecting. So the healthcare or the health bureaucracy, is testing these companies' production of pharmaceuticals. They're still protecting some of their privacy rights, but they're testing their outcomes, their predicted outcomes. So I do think there's that balance between having some oversight, some organizational oversight within the government, and still some protection of the privacy of the providers. So that, again, there's a balance there, and that's probably another whole discussion, another whole conversation about how to approach it.
Do you see that happening at the local level in state legislatures, or are you expecting that to happen in the Congress?
I hope Congress, I think California, for example, joined a number of states where they filed a lawsuit against the social media companies because of harm to children. That, of course, you know how long that takes to go through the legal process. So that's still out there. So California tends to be a leader sometimes in these things. So I could see California getting ahead of that. But again, these are legal challenges that take a lot of time.
Yes.
And maybe California would, since a lot of these Silicon Valley companies are here, maybe it would get it more in front of that than others, but I haven't seen that so far. And again, part of it, I think, is understanding it. We're just now understanding the impact of social media, and most people are not aware of the potential for AI, let alone combining it with quantum computing. So again, I think that the public knowledge, or even the political knowledge, the institutional knowledge, is behind the curve on how fast the technology is developing.
And of course, smart minds like yourself and others are always trying to think as to the unknown and unknown, right? We know, right, whatever we know about AI, what it does, its capabilities today, and its potential, but it's the unknown that petrifies the people.
Right.
So do you see this work when it comes to, call it legislation or oversight or governance structure or guardrails? Do you envision this as a long-term ongoing effort, or because it's very hard to know upstream that here are all the risks, we'll pass the legislation, but do you see this as a moving target?
Yes, I think it would be a long-term, and again, that's part of my argument about how rapid change has occurred in technology in the last 30 years, that we need something, we need an entity that, their perspective is probably more broad in the technology sphere than just focused on a particular technology. And that would be a challenge, but if this would be an entity that would have to have a lot of engineers and scientists that and some power, again, more transparency of the companies, the providers, even if there's still some protection from their their data, their business, algorithms that are part of their business model, some protection for their proprietary interests. At the same time, there's transparency about the effect. Again, that's top of the head pondering.
You have more questions over there collected? Do you have any
Yeah,
other?
there's a couple of questions. So some of it's Gopal, you and Dale have already covered, but there's still a lot of. So we talked a lot about the US policies and which is working. So Dale, in your opinion and your understanding, how crucial is international cooperation in addressing these ethical challenges posed by these technologies, especially given the global nature of tech development these days?
Well, there was a really interesting article, and I included that both in the abstract and I have a clip from it in the PowerPoint later on. And this was a group, let me try to find it here real quick. So the Stanford HAI, Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence entity, hosted a United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights function. It was called the Human Rights Dimension of Generative AI, and that was just this past February at Stanford. And it included global head of human rights at Google, director of thematic engagement, blah, 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 UN Human Rights Office, professor at Stanford Law School, Policy Center, the Emerson Collective, U.S. Department of State's Bureau of Cyberspace and Digital Policy. Anyway, this panel looked at this from somewhat from an international perspective and came out with some recommendations that are very, very strong and very concerning. So there is some of this now where you see kind of a UN, United Nations centered perspective on this, and that's in the abstract, and it's in the PowerPoint slide, that reference.
So just not a pushback, but just to tweak it a little bit more. We have our alliances, NATO alliance, and countries that we work very closely with, right? Then there are bad actors.
Right.
So yes, of course, there's a UN component to it. So my question is that how do you see US positioning itself in terms of protecting our own interests?
See, I think the bad actors is where you get to the, National Security Agency, CIA. That's where you get to our intelligence community and what they're doing. And of course, that's not transparent at all. I don't know how much sharing occurs across, the different countries in NATO, or I don't know how much of that goes between the different security entities. I doubt a lot, but so.
Ikram, I'll just send it back to you, Ikram. It looks like you have another question.
Yeah, Gopal. So I think we are almost on the time, and I will look forward to having Dale's final thought on the ethical trajectory of technology in healthcare.
Well, again, I'm extremely positive about the potential for AI and improving healthcare, but I'm also concerned that there are some blinking red lights about ethical concerns of AI, especially when combined with quantum computing, that we've already seen affect our social institutions and our political, trust in government, trust in organizations, trust in truth. So I do think trying to get out in front of it, working with some of these think tanks, some of the academic institutions is really important.
Oh, great. Thank you, Dale. I look forward to having the closing remark from the Gopal.
Well, thank you so very much, Dale. I appreciate you coming on with us today for this wonderful conversation. Got your insights, got your you've pointed out some very difficult or questions and scenarios that we must take into consideration in this entire ecosystem. People who are concerned about AI, who want to leverage AI for improving innovation and taking it to the next frontier. So the grand challenge before us is going to be, as a community, to think about not just the possibilities and what is possible, the art of the possible with AI, but also some of the concerns that you have highlighted. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us today, and many thanks to all of you who have joined us in this country and abroad for this conversation. Your questions that you submitted have enriched the discussion. I hope you've all enjoyed the conversation with Dale Good just as much as I have. We will post Dale's comments and his slide deck so that you can read it at your leisure and feel free to share with your group of friends who are getting deeper and deeper into the health AI space. We will soon be sending you more information on other speakers that we see joining us in the future for these roundtable discussions. Have a wonderful rest of the day, all of you. And again, um, thank you, Dale, for covering these critical topics related to ethics and AI and quantum computing. And I like the way you put the lens as the three T's: truth, trust, and technology. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah.